All right, the legend is back. You see him there right on the screen. He hasn't been on in a couple months, but we figured it'd be a good time to do this. Brad Graham at the SF Niners. Legendary. I think it's like the biggest account covering everything 49ers. So that's not the 49ers account. I don't know if you're going to catch them, Brad. They've got a couple million,
No,
but
that's gonna
one
be
day.
really hard.
How you doing, man? How's it going?
I'm doing phenomenal, man. Thank you so much for setting this up. I'm really excited to, have our conversation because obviously, like kind of we were talking about offline, it can get a little crazy, after a loss. And I think, a little perspective goes a long way, and just kind of talk through things. And I'm excited to be back on the channel with you, dude, and to be able to get into all this good stuff.
Yeah, you've been watching a lot of tape. I was down in San Diego for a couple days, and I popped some of it open, and it's fun to, watch some of it, and then go on Twitter, and then I see your cut ups, and then I see your commentary, oftentimes from the offensive lineman's perspective
Correct.
and the protection perspective. And you were at an event last night with Alex Smith, so you got to ask some questions about what the 49ers are running protection wise, because this got complex against the Chiefs. It was
It did.
complex in the Super Bowl when they gave up those 9 unblocked pressures. So my first question for you is, what did you pick up talking to Alex Smith yesterday in relation to the struggles the 49ers are facing right now?
Of course. And to provide a little bit of context, one of the things that we've been seeing on film, not only this year, but really for the last couple years, where the 49ers will get caught in this overload look, where the defense will maybe show numbers to, let's say, the left side of the offensive line. So the center, which is Jake Brendel, right? He's going to identify the mic, and that is going to trigger which way they're sliding protection. So in this instance, they're going to slide their protection to the left. Well, what's happening is defenses are dropping out the overloaded side that the offensive line is sliding to, and then they're bringing numbers on the backside, and it creates a numbers mismatch. And so when we talk about free rushers and Brock Purdy being under duress, we keep seeing this look. We saw it against the Cardinals. You think of that play where Brock is getting tackled and the ball flutters up into the air and he gets an interception, kind of ends the opportunity to come back versus the Cardinals this year. It was the same thing. They had the numbers. They were just sliding the protection to the opposite side. They bring a weak side pressure. So I've seen it. It's a trend now. I've seen it enough times to be able to be like, okay, there's something to this. So having the opportunity to talk to Alex Smith, being a quarterback and being a guy who either makes checks or audibles at the line and reads a defense pre and post snap, I was like, oh, this is the perfect guy to talk to, not being a center in Kyle's scheme, right? So when I talked to Alex about this, basically explained that same scenario. And he essentially said that when Brock Purdy comes to the line, Kyle doesn't want Brock thinking too much. He doesn't want Brock to have to see all of these things and have to set the protection, check calls, and do things like that at the line of scrimmage. So that becomes the center's responsibility. So that's why Brendel calls out the mic and all those different types of things. What he was telling me is that defenses have keyed on that specific protection rule, so they're aware of what Brendel's keying on to slide the protection. And so as a result of that, they're bringing the opposite side pressure. And so they're able to get those number looks. And I was like, okay, that was my assumption of what was happening. And he just kind of confirmed that that is the case because Brock isn't coming to the line and sliding or checking protections. That's on Brendel, and that is based on the way he's seeing the defense pre-snap. And essentially, the defenses understand the rule and they are effectively taking advantage of it. So that's why we kind of keep seeing them get caught in those looks. And for Purdy, what he has to do is he's got to be able to identify it pre-snap that you got the overload blitz coming and go to hot. That's about the route that he has to go. So it was cool talking to Alex because I had an idea, but I always am going to, talk to someone who actually knows it and has done it at the highest level.
Oh,
And
what a novel
basically,
concept.
right?
Or going off and talking on the internet, you're going to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah,
I
it's
really
helpful,
appreciate
right?
that.
So again, I just wanted to be like, hey man, this is what I'm seeing. How do you feel about that? And he's like, yeah, you're seeing it correctly. It's there, it's a key that the defense is reading on, and they're countering it. And so I was like, okay, well, that's great. And so it was a great conversation. We chopped it up a little bit more about some other things, but that was kind of the main point. And kind of like, yeah, okay. So when we see that, it's the defense being able to identify where they're sliding protection, and they're basically just countering where they're sliding their protection.
Now, the hot route, the read for the quarterback to beat the blitz on the play that you highlighted with the two rushers coming from basically the right side, if we're looking at it from behind on the end zone angle, was to Brandon Ayuk, who was on the left. So that's a very, very difficult throw, if not impossible, for Brock Purdy if those guys are on him very quickly. Schematically, isn't there something the 49ers can do a little bit different on the side from which the blitzers are coming from? Because typically, I think general wisdom, blitz beating involves throwing into the blitz, right? So I
And
think George Kittle was lined up on that side. Can the 49ers have Kittle sit down quicker? I mean, he's got to be able to identify that those two rushers are coming in when he releases off the line of scrimmage, right? So shouldn't there be an easier answer for Brock Purdy on the side of the field from which the blitz is coming?
I have the same questions that you had, David, because you also had an outlet with Kyle Juszczyk who went out in the flat on the left side. So obviously you want to throw to the void, or the where the blitz is coming from. But as you mentioned, Kittle was running up the seam and his back was to.
I lost you.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
My AirPods like to kick off my microphone sometimes. But essentially, what I was saying was, you know, the timing when you have a free rusher is so limited, right? I think when we're going frame by frame, it's like really easy to be like, oh, why didn't we make this decision here, see this faster? But in real time, it's happening in 1, 2, and you're getting hit. And so I just think that, I don't necessarily have the answer for it, but I think, if we're just looking at it, objectively and trying to understand it and process it better, you would want to see more answers, especially when, it's Spags, right? We know he's going to send the house at the San Francisco 49ers. So maybe built-in blitz beaters or outlets that are readily available and being alert to what is happening. It feels like that would genuinely lead you to greater success, right? So that is an observation that I've also had as well.
Well, and that it leads directly toward greater play calling creativity, adjustments from Kyle Shanahan. And I think this is where perspective is really important because the 49ers have faced some stagnancy offensively just as a team in the past few years. I think each of the past 3 seasons have seen the 49ers hit a rough stretch. 2 of those 3 saw them start very similarly record-wise to how they started this year. They're sitting at 3-4, but in 2021 they were 3-5. In 2022 they were 3-4. Then last season, even though they started 5-0, this time 2023 they were in the midst of a 3-game losing streak and everybody was freaking out. Every single one of those times the 49ers got things corrected. The 2 times when they came from 3-5 and 3-4, they got things turned around with games against the Rams. And I remember these games really well. I know you do too. Yeah. 2021 was a 31-10 win. That one was at home on Monday Night Football. And then 2022 was the Christian McCaffrey game where they won 31-14 and he threw a touchdown to Brandon Ayuk. He ran for a touchdown and then he caught one. That was actually a Jimmy Garoppolo play that reminded me, this is before we knew Purdy. He was on the team, but Purdy's made some plays like that. It was a little off schedule, found Christian McCaffrey in the corner. And obviously the 49ers won and they turned their season around. I think the one commonality between those 2 turnaround games against the Rams was that Shanahan got very creative. You can tell that he knew that there was a ton at stake and he simultaneously went back to the basics, but also added some real flair into his play calling. And both times he ran circles around the Rams. One time he had McCaffrey, the other time he didn't in 2021. Brad, to me, this feels like a similar type of moment. You've got a team that you've traditionally dominated here. Just like the Rams at the time, especially back in 2021, that was a team the 49ers didn't lose to. In the Cowboys, right? They've beaten them 3 straight times, including twice in the playoffs. Yeah, the Cowboys are struggling. They're nowhere near as good as the 2021 or 2022 Rams. But you have the 49ers at a moment where their backs are up against the wall. They really need a win. And in the past, Shanahan himself has answered the bell schematically. And I feel that this is another moment where he's going to have to do something similar.
I think that's a great summary because in those moments, in the 2021 season, that's where the wide back originated. In these struggles, in these moments of trying to find offense, that's when Debo really evolved into what we now call the wide back, and how much success they were able to have because they were just lacking explosive plays out of the backfield because, as you recall, Raheem Mostert goes down in the first game against Detroit and he's lost for the season, and he's expected to be carrying the load and having a huge role in the San Francisco 49ers offense. So that was a big part of, man, when you lose a Christian McCaffrey, when you lose a Raheem Mostert, it causes you to have to rely on other weapons or go elsewhere. And so I think you saw Kyle have to adapt. They went into a skid there, right? I think it was a 4-game losing streak in 2021, right? They went,
yes, it was,
won their first 2, lost 4 in a row. And
then they won 1, and then they lost to the Cardinals. That made them 3-5. And the Cardinals lost.
That's the Colt McCoy game.
That was the Colt McCoy game where the defense couldn't stop anybody. They were a lot worse in 2021, by the way, than they are now by every metric, offensively, defensively, not by special. Well, no, maybe 2 special teams. They were terrible in 2021. Here they're 31 or 32, so it's hard to be worse. But they had the Packers in 2021 to be worse than them on special teams, and that ended up paying off in the playoffs at Lambeau. But yeah, anyway, go ahead. 2021 was ugly at the start.
It was. And then it was that Chicago game that really felt like it flipped everything on its head. And it was a momentum driving game. I even think back to the specific play. Remember the big scrum at the goal line? You got Alex Mack, Jimmy Garoppolo pushing into the end zone. And it just felt like it just energized the entire team. And they, in a hard fought battle in the beginning of that first half, and then they flipped it on its head. And then it felt like it was a momentum shift. I feel like with what we've been talking about the 49ers, a lot of it is schematic, a lot of it is creativity, but it also is a lot of, mental and momentum side to it as well. So I do agree that, we saw with some of the things against the Chiefs, looked like there was room for more, ingenuity and creativity and ability to try some different things. Is a little stagnant in areas, and I really can't say that loss boils down on one person. It felt like it was a collective kind of group responsibility for the loss against the Chiefs. And so when we looked at those past seasons, and like you mentioned, there's a spark. There was something to spark them in the right direction. So when you look at this Cowboys game and you look at 2 teams coming into this game with their backs against the wall, 3-3, both of them, both really similar tones around the urgency to win this one. I do think that there's a huge opportunity to be able to use this as the spark, and especially going into the bye where hopefully, David, Christian McCaffrey is coming back on the other side.
This is the article that just posted that I wrote today. It's up on the Standard, and it's exactly what we're talking about. Are the Cowboys the get-well medicine for the 49ers? And that in my headline is maybe, but there's a catch. The catch is, Brad, and we'll scroll down to find it right here. The catch is these special teams rankings. Lighter colors are good. Darker colors are bad.
Earlier. I was like, oh no.
And the 49ers basically have the worst special teams in the league, or second to worst. And the Cowboys have the best. So, I mean, the 49ers are a lot better than Dallas offensively and defensively. I could even put a chart up a little bit later. We can look at that. But here's a good matchup tweet from SF Data 49ers. It's a good account that basically has a lot of green on the 49ers side and a lot of red on the Cowboys side. So the 49ers match up really well with the Cowboys, who aren't good offensively or defensively. But we've seen it happen multiple times. Special teams can be the great equalizer or something that leads you to lose, more than an equalizer, something that just reverses how a game plays out, because those plays can be so damaging on special teams. But if the 49ers can play that to serve, they should be okay. And I think that the overarching goal, and you touched on this with talking about the bye week, in my analogy is that the 49ers are like a boxer, and there's 10 seconds to go in the round, and they're getting beaten up right now, but they just need a last 10 seconds. They need to find a way to, get one punch in over these last 10 seconds before they hear the bell ring. If they can land that one punch and walk back into their corner, they'll have time to patch up over the course of the bye week. And then they'll get that boost with Christian McCaffrey in all likelihood coming back. I talked to him very briefly today in the locker room. He was actually shooting hoops in the locker room, and he was rising up off the ground. Wasn't limited playing basketball in the locker room. So I think
every step he takes, you're like, all right.
Yeah, everybody's watching him.
Is he favoring one leg or the other?
I was sitting there talking to the new lineman that the 49ers picked up, by the way. And I haven't seen Christian McCaffrey in a couple weeks. He just normally isn't in there while we're in there with the media. But the 49ers picked up Dieter Iceland, who's from South Africa. It was awesome talking to him. He played rugby for the first 17 years of his life. Then he came over to a high school in Connecticut his senior year of high school, learned how to play football, and was with the Texans last year, and now is on the 49ers practice squad after he tried out yesterday. So I'm talking to Dieter Iceland, and all of a sudden somebody pats me on the back and just kind of scurries by me like really quickly. And it was Christian. And I was like, whoa, Christian's here, and he's moving really well, because the time that I put my head around to see who it was that patted me on the back, is like, what's up, David? He kept on walking, and he was already like 10 yards away. So he was moving like really quick. Then he was playing basketball a little bit later. So that's your Christian McCaffrey update. And that ties into what we're talking about with Niners-Cowboys, because they're not going to have him back this week. But if they can survive this week, get a win, they're going to be 4-4 with McCaffrey very likely coming back against Tampa Bay.
I mean, that would be such a jolt for this offense, obviously, especially coming off that game against the Chiefs. And man, if you can get Christian McCaffrey heading into that game against the Bucs, obviously the Bucs, just unfortunate injury news for them, as they've lost Godwin and Mike Evans, and who won't be up for that game. And it really puts you on a trajectory where you could see the 49ers, if they can stack some momentum here and just really build up some confidence against a Cowboys team that I think we all know they can beat this team. Like it's not a daunting task. If anything, I think the daunting task is just kind of getting back to playing their brand of football, getting back to doing what they've done so well, which is running the football, grinding out drives and getting back into this feels like a great opportunity to do that against the Dallas Cowboys. But I absolutely love the Christian McCaffrey locker room basketball update. It makes me happy because honestly, when stuff like that's happening, like I think of like when we're out at training camp, like I'm watching Talanoa Hufanga. I'm watching him, how he walks up and down the sideline. I'm watching how he interacts with his players. Is he favorite when he's jumping? And like, so I love it. That's great high level analysis right there. A guy that we want to know about and really want to understand like where he's at, because, obviously for good reason, been under wraps. But so far, everything that we've heard, and it's trending in the right direction. So,
and there's been so much and I know this is frustrating a lot of people that are really close to this situation, but there's been so much misinformation about this because there's just this vacuum. And sometimes, it's okay. You don't have to pry into everybody's medical records and try to figure out every tiny thing that he's doing. He's trying to get healthy as quickly as possible. It's Achilles tendonitis, and that's that. But I feel that in that vacuum, in that demand for, it's so insatiable now. I think it's because of fantasy football is probably a huge part of it, because Christian might have been the top pick for a lot of people. But so there's this, people know that Christian McCaffrey will get clicked on if you put something out there about him. And unfortunately, that just led to so much crap, like stuff, people saying he was going to retire. It's like, where did that come from? Like, I feel that I'm pretty close to this situation, and nothing of that sort has ever hit my phone or my desk, so it's really wild, all that we've heard over the past couple of months. But I can tell you that I've seen Christian with my own eyes. He's been in that locker room, and the 49ers are saying this openly. They hope that he comes back after the bye, and they are also playing this very, very cautiously, as they should. I don't know if you caught it today. Kyle Shanahan called Christian McCaffrey the NFL MVP during.
I heard that. I was
conference.
like,
yeah, he kind of snuck it in, right? But
yeah, I was like, okay,
So-
Kyle, tell us how you really feel.
Speaking about the Cowboys, this I think should give people a nice illustration of how poorly this team has played this year compared to last year. So you want to be further to the right and further up. The further to the right you are, the better your offense is. The further up you are on here, the better your defense is. So we don't have any like totally elite balanced teams this year. The Niners actually were up here with the Ravens last year. They were both in the upper right. That's why everybody was so excited about that game on Christmas. This year, the top team looks to be somebody like the Bills, maybe the Lions, who both have really good offenses, but their defenses have been, they've left something to be desired. The team with the best defense, the Vikings, the offense has kind of come back down to earth. Anyway, last year, the Cowboys were also in the upper right with the 49ers. This year, look where Dallas is. Below average offense and below average defense. So the 49ers, I mean, nobody's saying that they're playing particularly well, but if we want to give people perspective, they're still in the upper cluster of the league as far as the efficiency they've delivered. And they are what, 1, 2, 3, like 4 tiers above where the Cowboys have been. But this doesn't include special teams, which has screwed up a lot for the 49ers already. And I think saved Dallas in many ways. Big reason why the Cowboys are 3-3.
Yeah, no, this is a phenomenal chart because again, man, I'm a big visual person. So it really does illustrate, the disparity between, yes, the 49ers are 3-3 and it's not how, fans have expected the season to start. And so there's obviously some discomfort that comes from that. But man, when you look at the Dallas Cowboys right now, and you look at some of the teams that they barely beat, and this feels like a definite, a big opportunity to be able to, again, really assert your dominance over a team that you have been able to do that for, especially in recent memory. So this feels like a great opportunity to get back on track and really start to build that momentum.
You talk about momentum, and I think that you also talk about small schematic things. I think it's all connected. I think that, and you've played, I think this is the case in a lot of sports. You have to focus on the process of doing things technically correct, making the changes you need to make. Those lead to results. Results lead to energy, right? So we talked about the play where they pushed across the goal line against the Chicago Bears. I think that was week 8, 2021. That just didn't they didn't just wake up and execute that play and enjoy the results of that, the positive results of that. They played really well that game, especially the offense was, you could tell they were locked in, they weren't making mistakes, and it led to the play that you're talking about where the 49ers were pulling their collective weight across the goal line, and that led to the surge in energy. So I think that if you approach the process of turning things around correctly from that process-oriented standpoint, make sure you call this play right, execute this throw correctly, don't miss this pass protection. If you do those things correctly in that order, you're going to get those big moments that energize the roster collectively. And it turns into a snowball effect. And that's why a team could look so different in the back half of the season from what they looked like in early October or in September, because that kind of stuff adds up, and that kind of stuff can add up quickly. I really think that the 49ers, given their track record of being able to turn things around, and given the fact that we know they still have a lot of good players on the roster, what they really need is consecutive wins. They need to go on a little bit of a roll, but that only you don't just wake up and go on a roll. You have to do the small things right on a quarter by quarter basis to win a game, and then do that again to win a second game. Once they're on a roll, they've shown us in 2021 and 2022 that collectively the momentum, however, the energy, whatever you want to call it, yield something that is larger than the sum of the parts. Right now, I think the 49ers are getting less than the sum of their parts, but the goal should be to find something that could have them above that sum of the parts, which we've seen in the past.
Oh, I think that's a great summary of like how you can really get this back on track, because I think when you zoom out, it can feel daunting. It can feel like, oh my goodness, there's so much ahead of the San Francisco 49ers to get back to the tip of the mountain that we already know is such a challenge to get to. But as we know, David, football is about being where your feet are and taking care of the things that are directly in front of you. And it can be cliche, but it is really doing the small things consistently well. And if they can get back to that, if they can get back to that level of consistency, that, like you mentioned, will breed the confidence. And then you start to get into rhythm, and then you start to gel. And then that's when you're back to playing football and having fun. And it becomes a situation where it starts to snowball of good energy, right? And then you're like, okay, now we're back to playing 49er football. And I think that's just the biggest thing for me that I wanted to see from this 49ers offense. Yes, we want to see some creative plays and Kyle Shanahan dialing it up, just like you mentioned in that Rams game where you got Christian McCaffrey in his first full real game. Obviously came in against the Chiefs after what, like 48 hours in the 49ers building, which was insane to begin with. But then you got him throwing touchdowns to BA, and you feel that energy and you feel the momentum shifting, and you're like, all right, this team is feeling it. And that's the thing, man. Like, because you're at practice every day, you get a vibe, you get an energy. Oh, today's a flat practice. Oh, today's a high energy, high intensity. And it's about grabbing those things and being able to duplicate and stack and build that consistency. And it's small, it's almost an intangible quality of a team collective group, right? Yes, individually in each individual room, they're working on the fine details of, you got to have your foot here, you got to punch here, you got to run this route, you got to break it off at 5 to 7, not 6 to 8. These are the things, like, they're all doing that internally. But when you bring it and you stack it all together, and then you are able to build confidence as a unit, man, that's dangerous. And we know that this team has done that before with these core guys. Now it's about doing that and being able to tap into that. I think I saw something about Nick Bosa talking about that today, and maybe you can expand upon that on his locker. But he's like, we've done this before. We've had our backs, and now we've heard that throughout this season, right? Like we've had our backs against the wall. We've had to dig ourselves out, and I really do think that that's why, for me. And again, I'm almost calling it delusional optimism, because I know so many people are down on this season and ready to throw in the towel on the 49ers doing anything this year. But being around football for so long, that it's these little moments, these little sparks in a season, whether a drive, whether a play, whether a game, can change the momentum. And so that's what I'm looking for this team to do against the Dallas Cowboys. And if they can do that, man, and then keep that rolling, we got a season on our hands.
And it's always been, when the calendar turns to November for the 49ers in 2021, 2022, and 2023. Hell, even in 2020, I think it was mid-October, late October. They beat the Rams in a game in front of an empty Levi Stadium. That was the game where they were so beaten up with injuries, but they still found a way. They still had a little bit of a surge there before Garoppolo got hurt again. And then I think Kittle broke his foot and everything just went down the toilet in Seattle. But it seems that consistently the 49ers do find that second win. Now it's like surfing a wave, right? Can they actually catch the wave and start surfing it? It is hard to capture that lightning in a bottle. And that's why personalities on the team matter. That's why the youth infusion matters. Because the 49ers played 60 games over the 3 seasons prior to this one, 20 games this season. So we know that a lot of those veterans are tired. That's no secret, but that's why it was so important to hit on this draft class, to make sure that they had contributors to come and freshen the ship, right? And I think that they've gotten a lot of that. Ricky Pearsall was talking today about something that Malik Mustafa told him, and Malik Mustafa said, this rookie class is already contributing the way that this team has needed it to. As soon as we get you back, he was talking to Ricky Pearsall, that's going to be like the cherry on top. And they do have Ricky Pearsall back, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about timing and, just more X's and O's now because you're so good at this. One thing that caught my eye today was Greg Cosell talking about Ricky Pearsall. And I rewatched this game twice, and I liked a lot of what Ricky did away from the football. I don't think that the 49ers just offensively were cohesive enough to really highlight young receivers in that game, especially since Ricky was playing out of position. And it was not a pretty performance on the collective, as we're talking about. But if we want to look at this on a granular individual level, there were a couple times when he beat press coverage against the team that plays good man-on-man coverage in the Chiefs that, made me kind of nod my head. And Greg Cosell said the same thing. And, we all think back to that play where Ricky was open, but he didn't turn his head around quickly enough. Yes. And the throw kind of sailed right through him. It almost looked like a video game glitch in real time. But when you rewatched it went slightly behind him. And today, Ricky said at his locker, that route, I think he needed a little bit more width on the route. But first and foremost, he needed to turn his head around a little bit sooner. I think that should be a reminder to everybody that timing is so critical, especially for this 49ers offense. You go back to the Bill Walsh days, and timing was like Bill Walsh was like the father of timing, right? It was all about the 3-step drop, the 5-step drop, the 7-step drop. And based on that, receivers would cut their routes off at different spots. The angles would be different. I mean, just based on the quarterback's footwork, timing was everything. Timing is also an integral part of what Brock Purdy is trying to do with these receivers. And if Ricky Pearsall is a quarter second late turning his head around, the whole play can be detonated, right? The whole play might go off the rails. And I think we saw that in that one example. So that was his first game. I'm not faulting Ricky Pearsall for turning his head around a little late in his first NFL game. I think, though, that's the key to getting him into a productive flow, is finding that rhythm, finding that timing. Because when I watch his route running, I see talent. I see the ability to get open. Now he has to find the ability to, or discover the timing and efficiency with Brock Purdy to capitalize on what he's already doing well from a separation perspective.
I saw the same exact things as well. He's such a sudden mover when it comes to the way he's in and out of his routes. It's so the way he can snap out of the top of his routes. It's like, okay, like, yes, this guy is going to have the ability. He's going to be able to stem inside, and he's going to really threaten into a spot where he wants to get the cornerbacks to flip their hips, and then boom, he's breaking out the opposite way. And yeah, there are multiple instances, whether deep, breaking out, going up the seam, he is creating separation. And for his first game, like David, I know just as well as I do, how many practices did we get from Ricky Pearsall in training camp? Like a handful, maybe.
A handful, yeah, like 8.
And he, I think, the day I remember watching training camp right beside you was the day that he actually hurt his shoulder, and then he missed the rest of the preseason as a result.
Was that the day he caught the deep ball early on?
Yes, that was the day I was putting my camera away. Rookie media move. I was late putting my camera away. I missed. You're like, oh, that was the best play of training camp. I was like, of course I missed the best play of training camp. But yes, that was the day I'll never forget.
It was the very, very first drive. So I'm guessing you were putting your camera away from the first part of practice.
Yeah. I said, oh, what did I miss? You're like, oh, just the best play of training camp so far.
It was this, well, to describe it to you, you probably saw the 49ers might have posted it later, but it was a big rainbow pass. It was a bomb. I mean, I think it traveled 50 yards and Pearsall hauled it in. A lot of separation. We don't have the benefit of seeing the all 22 to see exactly what Ricky did, but I did see him very open, and I saw Brock Purdy very comfortably throwing to him. The Pearsall thing, and we're now hearing more about it. I think George Kittle said that he was lighting it up every single day at OTAs. That's what I saw when I was at OTAs on the open days, but we weren't there for the whole thing because the media is not allowed more than once a week. So it sounded to me like he did even more on the days when the media wasn't there during OTAs. And then it was a very brief glimpse during training camp because he came in with a hamstring and then he suffered the shoulder, which is something he dealt with his junior year in college. And that was something he was still rehabbing when he got shot. So he was rehabbing both shoulders, really, because he got shot in the chest, kind of near the shoulder. So it's a lot of scar tissue buildup that he had to clear out there. Now Ricky is healthy and he's back, but gosh, after all that adversity, it's probably going to take some time to find that precise timing. I just, it's all ruined these days. Football analysis is ruined by video games. I think everybody thinks that they could sit back with a controller and they're controlling Brock Purdy and they see Ricky Pearsall and all they have to do is hit X and the ball's going to go into Ricky Pearsall's hands. And it's just not that, right? It's just, there's so much other subtlety that's not automatic. And it takes a lot of drilling and a lot of repetition to get on the same page.
Well, and just like you mentioned, man, timing is at the forefront of it all, especially in the 49ers scheme. If you're breaking it off at the wrong depth, if you got a defender who's one step ahead of when you want to get that ball out, like that changes the whole dynamic of the play. It changes, Brock having to sidestep, not being able to step into his throw because he's surrounded by about 3,000 pounds of man meat trying to collapse on top of him. And he's got to get it out, right? And you've got to get it out quick. You can't have this big wind up and all these different types of things. So nuance, David, is the key thing with analysis that seems like these days is you have to fight to discuss through nuance of a play, nuance of why maybe something wasn't working out, nuance of why the timing was off. And it's easy to chalk it up to be like, oh no, it's that guy's fault. No, it's his fault. Oh, it's that guy. It's a collective. It's 11 men on the field trying all to synchronize and do the same thing within a 2.5 second window. And the precision reading, wide receivers have to be on the same page as the quarterback. They have to be speaking the same language telepathically by reading the defenses the same, understanding the concepts that follow off of that, the timing, what the quarterback wants you to do and expects you to do. And you got to be on that same page. And we know right now Brock Purdy is throwing into tight windows more than he has ever thrown before. And that is another element of timing. That is another element of having to be on point with all these little nuances that literally come down to singular steps in some instances. And it can be a challenge because if one little thing is off, a half step can derail a play. A half step, David, was the difference in the 49ers having Brock Purdy in the NFC Championship game against Philadelphia and not. Like, that is really what it comes down to. So I agree. I think when we come back to the conversation about Ricky Pearsall, there's a lot of promising things that you see. Yes, he had 2 catches, I believe it was, against the Kansas City Chiefs. So nothing crazy, but you see it. Like, you see the abilities that he has, and also what I really like to see is not only Pearsall but Jacob Cowing.
Yeah, Cowing showed even more, and he's been around the system more, so I would expect that. But that, everybody's going to talk about the double move on the deep pass, the little tunnel screen that they ran to him.
I love that.
I thought was more impressive. I thought he popped off the tape more there. He surged through 4 or 5 defenders, but they barely tackled him before he got to the goal line.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Jacob Cowing. I remember too, I think also that, it was that same practice that we were just talking about with, me missing the deep shot. That was also, I believe, Jacob Cowing's first practice of training camp or one of his first practices back, because he was dealing with injury as well.
Yeah.
And I remember,
right? All those guys were dealing with hamstrings.
And he came in, he had a touchdown in the red zone period. Remember that bobbling catch he had against the sideline. And instantly I'm like, all right, this guy's a playmaker. I was a big fan of Cowing. Shout out to my guy, Justin, who put me onto him before the combine. I watched the tape. I'm like, all right, this guy's got some ability. I talked to him at the combine, and you're like, all right, this guy's cool. Like, he's built the right way. He's wired the right way. He's 5'8", right? But He doesn't play 5'8". He plays with that spirit, or as the kids say, David, with that dog in him.
The dog
And I asked him about that, at the combine, and he's like,
nice.
I've had to play like that. I had no other choice. I was always a small kid, so I always had to have the biggest heart. I always had to be the toughest one because I was the smallest one. And you see that out there. You see that with his ability. You see that with how he attacks his routes, and he attacks the ball, and he attacks defenders. And I'm excited for both of them. Yes, they're young. Yes, they're raw. Yes, they've got a lot to learn, and they got to a lot to get up to speed on. But those two players, I do think are pretty darn solid.
One thing I really, really respect about your work, Brad, is that you're ahead of everybody on these players because you do the work with the prospects. You'll show up to the combine, you'll talk to these guys, and you don't know who the 49ers are going to pick. I mean, it's a lottery essentially at that point. Right. But you talk to so many players, and you do so much of the research ahead of time that then later on, 8 months down the road, you can come back and revisit your conversation with Jacob Cowing before he was a 49er, before he faced all the media of the draft. So I think you get a more authentic version of that player before he's shielded by NFL PR teams and all that. Yeah, I get it. You could still talk to guys in the locker room and all that, but I just think it's really neat that you're in there on the ground floor with a lot of these players. So that's a really cool anecdote on Jacob Cowing. Check out Brad, by the way. We got a lot of people watching, as I can see right now. So check out Brad at the SF Niners. Former lineman. So this was the question I've really been wanting to ask on top of the one that started this show when we were talking about protection. Now I want to talk about run blocking because the 49ers had an issue this past game. When they needed a yard at the most critical moments, they couldn't get a yard. And Jordan Mason, the numbers aren't good inside the 5 this year. He's got 7 carries, -1 yards inside the 5. They're generally going backwards when they're inside the 5. Mm-hmm. I'm not ready to throw it all on Jordan Mason, though, because I've seen some issues, schematically with numbers. So I know that somehow the 49ers separation issues in the pass game are probably tied to their running struggles because defenses are able to gamble against some of these runs. And I've also seen the 49ers blow some blocks up front. There's a lot of numbers indicating that this team is just not good in short yardage. Like stuff rate is really high for the 49ers, which is not good. That's the percentage of runs that are stopped at the line of scrimmage or behind it. And it was all something they were better at last year when they had Christian McCaffrey. So probably part of the issue is Jordan Mason, but you, my friend, are much more of the expert here. And I like to ask people who are smarter than me about this kind of stuff. What are you seeing up front with the 49ers struggles, especially in this past game against the Chiefs, where they couldn't pick up a yard when they needed just 1 yard?
Well, let's talk about the play that I think has been on a lot of fans' minds, right? Why didn't Jordan Mason follow George Kittle when you had George pulling up the middle, kind of off Banks's hip in between Brendel, and it's like, oh, it looked like for a second the Red Seas parted, right? And it looked like he was going to walk right in, but then you see him cut back. The thing that I'm seeing, and being an offensive lineman, I know how the guy behind me runs. I know what he's looking at me to do so he can set himself up. So it's all about leverage, as you know, David. It's about being able to beat a guy to a shoulder, essentially, especially in the zone scheme. So when Banks is trying to cut this block off on the inside of the defensive tackle, he's trying to get his head across, and he's trying to turn this guy so that basically what Mason is reading, he's reading Banks's hips. And if he sees the hips start to turn into the running lane, that's where Jordan is like, all right, we got it. We're going to punch this through. I'm going to follow Kittle right where it's designed to go, or where it seems like it's designed to go. Mm-hmm. Well, when you go back and you watch the actual play, you see the defensive tackle. He extends Banks and he's peeking right into the running lane. And so the way that I interpret that is Mason sees that, because when Mason sees that, he's thinking, all right, this guy's won. He's beat Banks to the inside because he's being stout in his gap. He's gap integrity, right? You don't want to get all crazy as a defensive tackle. So you got to push the offensive lineman off of you and then you look, right? You know how you see them do that little peek thing
Yeah.
where they're just kind of sitting there? That's what they're doing. They're holding their gap integrity, and they're reading the running back to see where he's going. So his head is in the running lane, which means he's about to shed Banks and be right there. On top of that, you do have Nick Bolton in the running lane right behind him. So in a split second, what I believe happened is Mason takes one step, he sees the guy peeking in the running lane, he's like, all right, cut back lane, because on what leverage tells you, especially in zone, is that Banks is set up for the cutback because he's already peeking inside. So if he cuts against the grain, Banks is already in the perfect position to pick up that block. Unfortunately, you have to give some credit to Spags on the other side. He had a defender in every gap imaginable, and that was McDuffie, who came off the route
such a good player
and just stuffed them. And it was like, oh boy, because I understand the process of like looking at it like in real time. It's like, oh, why didn't he just cut up field? If you know how the defensive lineman was going to react to that, he wasn't going to let Mason cut into that hole, and you had Bolton behind him to create more of kind of a impenetrable wall for Mason to go through. So his mindset, and I don't think it's incorrect necessarily, is all right, the leverage is to the inside. Well, I'm going to cut back, and that's going to set me up. And if McDuffie isn't there, we could be talking about 6. But great job by Spags. They weren't at all sold on a pass. They were selling out to stop run, and they were in every single gap. And as a result of that, they got the stop.
And McDuffie's kind of a joker, right? He could play anywhere in that secondary, and we've seen teams start to do that defensively to a greater degree. I almost think it's a direct antidote to the Shanahan style offenses that have taken over across the league, where you've got so many adaptable skill position weapons offensively. So Christian McCaffrey, we're talking about him earlier, is a great example. He can line up anywhere. Deebo Samuel can line up anywhere. George Kittle's a receiver. He's a tight end. Every once in a while, he'll take a handoff. So offenses had become so adaptable that they were ahead of where the defenses were. The natural way to counter that as a defensive coordinator, as an executive building a defense in the NFL, would be to get defenders who could line up at multiple different spots. Just make your defense adaptable. The Vikings have a ton of jokers. I mean, remember Andrew Van Ginkel was all over the formation. That was so tough for the 49ers to defend. Yeah. The safeties would come down, and they were doing crazy stuff against Minnesota. I think Kansas City and Minnesota are the two most aggressive defenses in the league when it comes to blitz rate, but they're completely different, right? Minnesota plays a lot of zone. Kansas City plays a lot of man when it comes to the coverages on the back end. But the results end up efficiency-wise being in a similar spot. You have two of the best defenses in the entire NFL. And somebody like Trent McDuffie, who ruined the 49ers Super Bowl hopes last year because he was in on the pressure on 3rd and 4, right? Spagnuolo, what's really impressed me is they lost L'Jarius Sneed, who's an outside cornerback. And I thought, okay, when they lose him, maybe McDuffie's just going to have to be outside the whole time. But no, McDuffie's still all over the field, even though they lost their best outside corner from a year before. He's not just playing slot. He's literally everywhere. And I think, you're talking about it here, he was at a very critical spot in the run game. And that's why the 49ers couldn't generate anything. They had one carry that was good, like that was memorable, 26 yards from Mason. Everything else seemed like he hit a wall up front.
And Pooney was phenomenal on that 26-yard run. He actually blocked 2 on that particular one.
Yeah, he did. I saw that. That was great. That was a good clip you posted. And, here's another thing that, I posted the numbers on. I think I should find them. The line to me is very arguably, especially in pass protection, is playing better than last year. It's much harder to measure run blocking statistically. And so that's why, I turn to people who watch a lot of tape and who know what they're watching, like you, because you actually have played along the offensive line. But there are ways to quantify the pass protection, Brad, and you might have seen it today. I'm going to take a screenshot of this and put it up on the screen. We can compare how the 49ers looked last year versus this year in pass blocking efficiency. I've almost got it. All right, here we go. So this right here, these are, let me make this, I don't want to cut off Colton McKivitz's name. These are percentile ranks, okay? So what that means is if you're the 32nd percentile, you're better than 32% of other centers. So if I'm talking about Jake Brendel, if you're Trent Williams here in 2024 and you're 73rd percentile, that means that you're better than 72 or 73% of other tackles. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you only succeed in like Drake Brendel's case here, 45% of the time. That means that you're better than about half or 45% of other centers. So let's not get this confused because there's a couple extremely low numbers here. But here's 2000. I'm circling it right now with my mouse. This is the pass blocking efficiency percentiles of the 49ers offensive line last year. They had Trent Williams. He was better than all but Penei Sewell. So he's 96th percentile tackle. Aaron Banks ranked as a 33rd percentile guard. Jake Brendel, 32nd percentile center. So they were below average, but they weren't absolutely atrocious. They were kind of that middle pack of left guard and centers. Where the 49ers had huge issues last year, and I think it was clear to everybody watching, was in the pass protection of Spencer Burford and Colton McKivitz, second percentile and fourth percentile. So they were near the very bottom. What I think has been extremely promising is the improvement of Colton McKivitz. As much flack as he takes, Brad, we talked about it 3 months ago. We thought that Colton McKivitz would take a step forward this year, and he clearly has. He's gone from the 4th percentile to the 36th, and then Dominic Pooney has replaced Burford, and he's actually above average. He's at 57. So when you look at this is a better collection, and I think you could expect Trent Williams to continue to play his way into better shape. I think he'll be in the 90s by the time this is all said and done. But you look at this line, and I think that they have, taken some credible steps forward, especially on that right side.
I thank you for explaining that, because I did see this and I was trying to what is, and now that you say it, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense. And not only does it make sense, it actually tracks, based on, because me, David, I love to break down the offensive line. And so every single snap of the offensive line I watched last year, and the Spencer being 2 and Colton being 4, that tracks. That was one of my bigger issues with Spencer, was he just was so inconsistent in that realm. And also too, when you're a guard, your pass protection is also tied to your tackle, because you guys are constantly passing things off back and forth. And if you guys aren't in lockstep, that also creates an issue as well. And so I think that's why McKivitz was also so low, is because they weren't playing well together. That was one of my biggest things that I was noticing from last season. It was like, yes, individually they were having struggles, but as a duo of a center, of a guard tackle, they weren't playing well, in regards to that kind of synergy that you have to have, because it is a mini team. It's the only group on a football team that is like that, where all 5 guys have to be doing and working together. And so when I look at this year with Trent, he's been kind of getting back to speed and getting up to speed. So 73 makes sense. Aaron Banks at 27 to 33 actually tracks with me as well, because I do feel like he has slightly regressed this year. And Jake Brendel did start a little slow in the first 2 weeks, but I do think he has picked it up, and Pooney has been pretty darn solid as well. So, and I do think McKivitz has taken steps forward. And I think when people try to evaluate McKivitz, and I think you might have these numbers, I don't know if you do, but I think he ranks as like the 34th highest paid tackle in the league. Like he's basically being paid as a swing tackle. And if he produces mid-level production for the 49ers, that's a pretty darn good
return.
It's an amazing
deal, yeah.
But I don't think people view it like that, because they're like, well, we want the best right tackle in the NFL, which I understand 100%. But when you look at McKivitz, he's for what he is and where he came from and how he's fit in. I think he's been doing all right. It hasn't been great, hasn't been ideal. It definitely, I say it every time with McKivitz. You have to be prepared for 2 to 3 pretty significant pressures a game. But other than that, he's going to hold up pretty well. And I think that's been the case throughout the year.
And when you look at the truth of the NFL around the whole league, there is a deficiency, a shortage of quality offensive linemen, especially tackles. Everybody's like, well, just trade for an offensive lineman. And it's like, well, there are none available to trade for that would make your team better. On the other hand,
notice how they never get traded either.
They don't get traded because they are precious commodities. Exactly. And the Trent Williams deal was the biggest outlier ever. The 49ers lucked into that one. It was tremendously good fortune. I don't know where they'd be without it right now, but they're certainly happy that it happened. You on the opposite side, you have a surplus of defensive linemen. I think we might have talked about it last time that we did a show. This goes back to how football has trended at the developmental levels in Pop Warner and high school. It seems that they're started to focus about 15 or 20 years ago on edge rushers and putting the best athletic talent to rush the quarterback. And that has now reached the NFL level, and it's been at the NFL level for years. The only way that we're going to see something swing the pendulum back in the direction of the offensive line is if offensive linemen that are started to be picked from the pool of best athletes at a young age. And the offensive line salaries, because of supply and demand, might start to induce that kind of trend, right? But it's going to take a while for that to catch up. And I know that it would warm your heart if the offensive line talent pool caught up to the defensive line talent pool as a former O lineman. But the truth is that it's just not comparable at this point. So, I mean, I could expand this to the 49ers trade deadline. They're way more likely to trade for a defensive lineman than any other position, maybe a linebacker, but probably the reason they're trading for defensive linemen every year is because those guys are most easily had at bargain rates due to supply and demand. There's a high supply of them. There's not a high supply of offensive linemen. And for that reason, you value guys like Colton McKivitz. You value guys that you can develop. And, we're talking about development. That's a big step up from Colton McKivitz. If he can continue improving this year and he can get this near the 50th percentile, that means he's better than half the tackles in the league. He's already better in this metric, and people are acting like he's the worst tackle in football. Last year, you could have made that argument. This year, you can't make that argument anymore. He's better than 36% of tackles in football in pass blocking efficiency. So if they can get this to 40, 50%, they already have Pooney up at 57. All of a sudden, you're happy with what you've gotten, especially for what you've had to spend on that line in an era where it's really, really hard to find good tackle play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that I think it would be helpful too is I think with what we're seeing from the better DCs right now, they are attacking that offensive line. They are throwing the kitchen sink at them. And let's be honest, passing off stunts and picking up blitz it's how I measure cerebral ability of an offensive lineman, because it's so difficult. It's so challenging to be able to see what they're showing you pre-snap, and then they're just sending players from all different spots, looping, slanting, pulling you down, and you have to have the awareness to be able to understand what's unfolding in front of you, to like pass guys off, understanding that your guy is there, and have the confidence to be like, I'm letting you go to the inside because I need to get this guy out here. It's always how I measure cerebral ability with offensive linemen. It's why I've been so happy with Dominic Pooney, because you could see it in the preseason. You could see the cerebral ability. I remember one play against the New Orleans Saints where he's blocking a guy, I think it was Cam Jordan when they had their starting defensive line. He shoots all the way down from the 9 tech. He picks him up. They have a bust on the backside with a looper, and he sees it, and he's like, oh, I got to get this guy. And he bails off his guy, picks up the guy who's breaking free, saved Brock Purdy from getting smashed in the face in a preseason game. And I'm like, all right, this guy's all right. This guy's he's gonna fit in well here, and he's just continued to improve. And the thing with Pooney is he's only gonna get better. He's only gonna improve. He's only gonna get more stout. And so the offensive line, I don't think it has been perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that if they can take some of the heat off that group, and I don't know how you do that, whether you're getting the ball out of your hands quickly, neutralizing the rush with or blitz or with certain blitz beaters, tunnel screens, your standard good old screen, something just to get these defenders upfield and get them kind of second guessing their rush. I think that would be a huge benefit for those guys up front, because right now, like Spags and Flores, they are throwing everything at them. And it's hard to be like, oh yeah, these guys stink, when you're also looking at them like, dang, they are under siege right now from an offensive line standpoint, and they're doing their best to keep their heads above water.
And that, we can finish up with that. Football is a beautiful collective sport, not just 11 on the field, but the coaching staff, and that's Shanahan on the sidelines, but guys that are drawing stuff up in the booth. Everybody has to be in synergy. So, I absolutely hate the whole system argument about any player. I know we see it most often at the quarterback position. I think it's patently stupid, because football is a system. Football is a measurement of how well you operate within a system. It's a team sport. It's so idiotic and simplistic to act like there are individuals playing on islands in this great team sport that we get to cover. I think it's disrespectful to the game, but that's a whole other tangent. I just think that we. I'm going crazy.
I know where you're going with that.
Yeah,
I know for sure. Alex Smith said that yesterday when he was talking to us. He said
anybody you talk to that's played football at a high level will say the same thing, and because they actually put the blood, sweat, and tears into a sport, they understand the beauty of it. I normally don't like the cliche respect the game, but I think it really does apply here. Because you are going out there with your brothers, you are going out there trying to organize chaos, right? Football is inherently chaos. That is that the team that organizes that chaos best is going to win. And I think that's the essence of the game, not who throws for 350 yards, right? I think the essence of the game is who can be the most efficient as far as getting their 11 to move the ball and score points versus the other team's 11. And that's what the 49ers have to find a way to do. That's what's going to give them that energy boost. So it's going to give them that momentum that we talked about. They quite haven't found that sweet spot yet, but they were in a similar position in each of the past 3 years where they really weren't clicking, and then they started clicking right around this time of the year. Anyway, Brad, thanks so much. Everybody, you guys can check out. This is up on the San Francisco Standard. I'll toss the link into the comment section about the Cowboys and the 49ers. But what you should check out and what you should listen to, if you don't do that, is Brad. Brad, where can we find you? I know where to find you, but tell everybody what you want them to hear about your work.
Well, you could find me at the SF Niners pretty much on any social platform. You'll find me poking around, talking something about 49ers somewhere, or if you guys want to follow me at my personal X account, I guess is what you call it. You can see it on the screen at Graham_SFN.
I have a question. Yeah. You have both accounts. How do you decide? And first off, how do you tweet from both of them? Because you're active on both of them. How does that logistically work? And two, like, what goes through your head? Like, okay, I want to tweet this from my personal account with your name on it versus the SF Niners one. How does that balance work?
That's a great question. So obviously I started this with the SF Niners. It started through the brand page. So with the brand page, it had a very specific kind of ideology in the way that I wanted to go about it. A lot of it, when you don't have that access, sometimes, hey, you gotta kind of aggregate a little bit. You kind of gotta find and look and hunt and try to find relative content to bring to a group of people who's looking for it. So that's essentially where that account started. And so for my personal, it's just me being me. It's me tweeting my thoughts. It's where all my film clips go. It's where my my breakdowns go. Before, everything was kind of funneled into one spot with the SF Niners, but it's become a little bit more separate. So it allows like my personal page. It's just me talking ball. It's just me talking prospects, me posting, meme here or there. But that's how I differentiate it. It's just kind of like the brand page and then my personal page. And that's just kind of how I attack it.
So are you sitting at like a Death Star command center right now
Dude.
with a bunch of monitors where you're like, okay, this goes to that account, that goes to this. Now we're going live and it's streaming out to Facebook and everything. Like you have this. I could see part of the setup.
I wish I could send you a picture right now of I've got a big monitor here. I've got my laptop in the center. Got this big kind of like square monitor that I absolutely love. I have my little iPad, or it's not little, it's an iPad Pro right here. And then I got my 2 phones right here. Dude, I got screens everywhere. It is legitimately a command center. But
it reminds me of that's the SF Niners command center. So check that out online. But it reminds me of the actual 49ers command center at Levi Stadium. The guys in the engineering room, I was walking through the hallway earlier this season, and they're like, hey, you guys, you have to come check out the engineering room. So I walk in there. And I go and look, and they showed me this. It's amazing. It's literally a command center of the whole stadium. And they're like, "Hey, do you see that switch over there?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they said that turns on the lights in the whole stadium. How cool is that? I was like, "Oh wow." That's the room, by the way, that Tom Brady made famous when he walked through and he took the pictures. So if you go further into that room, everything is in there. You guys are super cool that work back there. Anyway, I immediately thought of that when I heard you. And they have a bunch of memorabilia in the command center over there too. So just like
I see this comment by Dank. He says Brad is like a storm chaser of the Niners. I think that is a phenomenal description of some of the things I do. I'm out here trying to hunt, search, and look for content that anyone would find relevant, and if they do, then hey, we're going to talk about it, we're going to post about it, and that's pretty much how we got our role. And I don't think it's essentially what I envision for the future, but it's where we're at right now, and that's all. Just like we said earlier, you got to be where your feet are, and that's what we're doing.
Heck yes. I think this is a subscriber or member of yours, but
cool.
Yeah, cool. Nice little comment there. Thanks everybody for the comments. We just wanted to have a discussion today, so I know we didn't get to them. And I know people are probably watching the Warriors too. So season opener NBA, you can go off and watch that now. I didn't want to tell you about the game earlier in case you forgot about it to make you watch this, but hopefully you can catch up on that. Brad, thanks so much, man. This was a lot of fun. You gonna be in the house on Sunday?
I will. Looking forward to it. Gonna be a big one.
Cool.
All hands on deck for that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll see you there. Sunday Night Football, 49ers against the Cowboys. We'll see if George Kittle has a shirt on, a la Gary Plummer again.
Yeah.
Underneath his jersey. But we'll just leave it at that. Thanks, Brad. Follow him at the SF Niners. We'll talk to everybody soon.
Appreciate it.